Hey there, fellow tamers and Digidestined. It's Mike, aka Sinaku from Overground, and welcome to episode 2 of the 1.5 Rainbow series. If you're unfamiliar, the Rainbow series is a series of videos in which we build one deck out of every color with every new set release of the Digimon card game that drops. And these are kind of our first initial drafts. These can be decks that are our favorite Digimon, our favorite strategies, our favorite archetypes, or just something that's near and dear to our heart. So last time in the 1.0 Rainbow series, our red deck of choice was actually Red Omnimon. In this version of 1.5, our red deck for this series is actually going to be Red Omni. I'm trying to make this Rainbow series a lot more competitive as opposed to the last Rainbow series. However, if you guys have any suggestions for any decks of specific colors that you would like to see in future Rainbow series as future sets get released, feel free to leave a comment and I'll put it in my back pocket and we'll be able to make those decks for you in the future. So this, we just did episode 1, which was yellow, which is the competitive Shine Greymon variant, and now we're looking at a competitive Red Omni deck. Again, this is based off what we were able to pull out of our boxes. So let's go through it real quick, and I'll kind of talk about certain card choices as we go through the deck profile. So first we're going to start off with our eggs. We got 4 of the Digimon, the bread boys, you know I love them, they're adorable, and then 1 Yokomon. Now, most decks will either play 1 Koromon or some combination of Koromon and Gigimons. The reason I'm taking this route with the Yokomon is because I built this deck to be a bit more control oriented, and it's more focused on dealing with your opponent's board presence through attacking over their threats as opposed to just going straight for the security. So Gigimon, very powerful egg, as opposed to needing the 4 stack with Koromon to get the plus 1000 boost. Gigimon, as long as your opponent has 5 or more cards in trash, we get the guaranteed 1000. And because we're going to be going after our opponent's stacks relatively early on with this deck, we can hit the 5 card threshold very, very easily. Moving on to the rookies, we've got 8 Agumons. We have 4 of the starter deck Agumon, which gives us the generic plus 1000 boost, and 4 of the promo Agumon, where if we have a Greymon in our name, we get plus 2000. Now, this Agumon was originally a Gilmon, and was almost intended to remain Gilmon. However, after a few test matches, I found out that the power of this Agumon cannot be underrated when you combo with other cards that we're going to be talking about very soon. The next rookie is 3 Beomon. This is the new Beomon for 1.5. This is on deletion on your turn. You get to gain 1 memory. I'm still on the fence about whether or not I want this Beomon to be the 2-cost Beomon instead, just for extra choking potential. However, it came to my attention in testing that a lot of decks in this format pretty much all play memory tamers, so choking isn't really that big of a thing anymore. So instead, I'd rather just have a 3-cost that I can just kind of play to round out the last cards of my turn to give my opponent 3 anyway. And then going into my turn, because I also play Memory Tamer, which is the one type that we'll get to a little bit later, if I can swing with that Beomon and it dies, I can actually start my turn with 4, which will be important for other combos that we're going to get to as we later on, as we discuss the deck. And then to round off the deck, we're just playing 3 Monodramon. Again, cutting back on these 2 costs because the ability to choke out your opponent with these 2-cost rookies isn't as impactful now when most of the decks in the format play Memory Tamers. Imperial Dramon will generally play Davis. Sarismon will play Mimi. Shine Greymon plays TK, etc., etc. So moving on to the champions. We're playing a full 4 suite of the 1.0 Greymon. And this is the one with the inheritable you gain plus 2000. Now, this is going to go into the entire argument I said earlier about how I want my deck to be able to go toe-to-toe with my opponent's threats, and I want to be able to attack over them without having to waste removal resources. And in this deck, as you'll see, there's so many different ways. There's so much extra redundancy in the form of DP gain that I can use that to my advantage to get over my opponent's Megas, and I can get over my opponent's opposing Omnimons, for example. And especially when I have a lot of cards in this deck that actually have piercing as well, that adds a lot of value to these DP buffs. So moving on, we're playing the 4 Dr. Animon, 1 cost, straight explanatory, and then we're only playing 3 blocker this time around. And that's because I found blockers don't necessarily have a lot of innate value in this format, I find. Because again, going back to the Memory Tamer discussion, it feels like almost like you're wasting a resource evolving into a blocker, especially if you're just going to evolve over top of it and just using it as a stepping stone. I'm more likely to hard play blockers nowadays because, again, my opponent's generally going to be going to at least 3 at the start of their turn anyway. So I can just give them the full 3, maybe even start them out with 4, which is a little bit more than what they were expecting to get in the first place. But I'm using blockers now more as a means to protect my large stacks and my large mega investments, as opposed to using it to protect my actual security. The only time where I feel like blockers are actually really relevant now is against super aggro decks like maybe Rookie Rush or Imperial Dramon, and that remains remains to be seen if this ratio will change. Again, this is just kind of a first draft, and it's all going to be dependent on the metagame as I see it based on the tournaments that I enter on a regular basis. But for now, this is kind of my theory and my reasoning when I'm kind of dropping my blockers down, because I'm only using them as a preventative measure to make sure that if my opponent is on a similar strategy where they're using all these DP buffs to hit me on the back crack, I can save my giant stacks from being deleted through battle. Moving on to our ultimates, we've got 4 Lava Greedamon, probably the coolest or best inclusion so far, because now we have an additional 2-drop ultimate. It just makes everything run a lot smoother now in terms of reaching the end goal of our Mechas and Omnimon top end in this deck. We're just complementing it with an extra 3 Groundramons. Now we have 7 2-drop ultimates total. This complements really well with our tie, because now we can go into, especially if our opponent has a Memory Tamer, we can go into an ultimate for 2, put us to 1, and then if we end up landing on a Blitz Greymon, our opponent will only go to 3 as opposed to the 4. And in talking about the DP buffs, these 3 Groundramon can be replaced for the secret rare Metal Greymon if you so choose to take that route, and that's for 2 reasons. The Metal Greymon will combo well with this Agumon because it'll go to 11,000 or more depending on any additional buffs that you have, and its inheritable will also give your Digimon an extra 3,000. So having the secret rare Metal Greymon in place of Groundramon is a good tactical decision in terms of bringing this whole strategy all together, because again, it's extra 3 cards that add that DP addition redundancy to give you more outs to your opponent's stuff. However, right now, I'm valuing the speed of Groundramon right now over the extra DP buff because I already have enough cards to grant me that so far in testing as it stands. And finally, the last 2 ultimates. This is the new Metal Greymon from 1.5. So this is on Digivolution. You get to return a level 7 Digimon card with the Virus attribute from your trash to your hand. And what has the Virus attribute in this level 7? It's our new friend Omnimon Ultra S. The reason we're playing 2 of this Digimon is for 2 reasons. So first of all, because we're playing multiple copies of Ultra S, if Ultra S is in our security early on and it gets checked, we can actually play this Greymon to add it back to our hand, which effectively means we're playing 5 copies of Ultra S. And again, this kind of goes in combination with the whole thing about we're playing this more as a control variant of Red because we're using Ultra S as often as possible to keep suppressing our opponent. The second reason we play this is because it has piercing, and because we're playing the promo Agumon, if we can get this in a stack with, let's say, the promo Agumon and the Greymon, and then either one of these inheritables, depending on what we're attacking over, will get the 1,000 regardless. That means that this is going to go 7 plus 2, which is 9, plus 2, which is 11, plus 1, which is 12. That means we're swinging with a level 5, just a regular ultimate, for 12,000 and piercing. That is a very, very big interaction that's kind of too big to ignore. So moving on to the Megas, now we're going to be playing a full 4 suite of Phoenixmon. Again, this just kind of goes into the speed and the turbo element of the deck, and then we're complementing that with 3 Blitz Greymon. Blitz Greymon is the newest Red Mega addition to the Omnimon family, and it is a doozy. So Blitz Greymon is a 4-cost Digivolution, which is a little bit high, and in past kind of Red Omnimon videos or Galamont videos, we always advocated that the 4 cost is kind of what made the card unplayable. But Blitz Greymon has so much going for it that it's worth playing in multiples all the time. So Blitz Greymon is a 12,000 attacker, and it has piercing. And on Digivolve, you get to de-Digivolve one of your opponent's Digimon by 2, which is very, very, very strong. Because if you don't have access to immediate removal, you can set your opponent back a few turns, because we're in a very evolution-heavy meta right now. We have Saraspawn decks running around, which is very evolution-heavy based on getting into their top end. Shine Greymon, very evolution-heavy in getting into their Shine Greymons and making sure they can, counter your board state. Even Omnimon itself is an evolution-based deck because we're going up into the chain, into our Megas to get into our Omnimons. So Blitz Greymon is a very, very powerful inclusion in the metagame to kind of keep your opponent at bay and slow them down a little bit. And then, depending on how they respond, you also have a Piercer in your back pocket. Again, this ties into like having why we play this promo Agumon, because Blitz Greymon has Greymon in its name, which means that it's going to go up to 14,000 by default with this Agumon alone, not bearing any additional DP buffs. So we add this Greymon, it's going to bring us up to 16,000, and then if we have this, it brings us up to 17,000. And if we don't have this, it still brings us up to 15,000 alone, which means we can already just simply trade with Omnimons that our opponent has to just get them off the board complete without having to waste a removal spell. Or if we can get up to that 16,000 threshold, we can actually just run over them and then pierce them even further, which again adds credence as to why we might want to play the Secret Rare Metal Greymon instead as well. And finally, the last Mega that we're playing is one Volcanic Dramon. And Volcanic Dramon have kind of been back and forth with whether or not I actually want to play it. It's here mostly because I'm still seeing a little bit of Rookie Rush in my local metagame, so I want to have a hard counter to it. But it's also really good because since we're playing Tie, if we start our turn with 3 and we have an ultimate on board, we can actually evolve the Volcanic, top of that ultimate, go to 0. We get Security Attack +2 now, and depending on where our inheritables lie, we can make this Volcanic 12, 13, 14,000, which is very, very, very strong. Then finally, we're going to go into the last little bread and butter part of of the deck, and that is the entire Omnimon package. So we're playing 3 Omnimon Alter S, and we're playing 2 of the regular 1.0 Omnimon. Most people switch this. Sometimes they play 3 and 2, sometimes they play 2 and 2. I'm a strong advocate of Alter S very specifically, especially in combination with this Metal Greymon, because since we have so many copies, and again, this is why I don't play this extra security attack Greymon, is because I'm not interested in going after my opponent's security earlier on in the game. I'm not playing this as a standard aggressive red strategy. I'm more interested in constantly keeping my opponent off their board. So I'm constantly interested in using the speed and turbo capabilities of all of my cards to go into Alter S as often and as frequent as possible, because I constantly want to be blowing up their entire board. I want to make them constantly waste all of their resources, and I want to keep putting them into a position where they're going to be running out of cards to a point where once they're finally suppressed enough, then I can go after their security and they have nothing left to play that can actually counter my strategy. So again, having access to basically the equivalent of 5 Alter S's allows me to continuously put so much pressure on my opponent by constantly, in combination with Blitz Greymon, constantly de-digivolving their board, constantly nuking their board with Alter S, and constantly putting them in a position where they have to keep wasting more and more resources just to try to play catch up and get back into the game. And finally, we're rounding out the deck with 2 Gaia Force, which seems very weird to say in a red deck, and 1 copy of Tai. The Gaia Force has been trimmed down now because it's not as necessary. We have so many more forms of removal and so many more forms of disruption in red that Gaia Force isn't as powerful as it used to be back in the 1.0 format. And honestly, having multiples of these in your hand is kind of bricky. I would rather have more Digimon in my hand that I can constantly use as bridges to keep climbing up my chains. However, we can't deny the power of Gaia Force in the security. And if I do happen to draw it, which I potentially will draw with all the evolution chains that I have going on a regular basis, I can use this to deal with threats that my other forms of removal otherwise wouldn't have been able to deal with. And again, finally, we're rounding off the deck with 1 copy of Tai. This is a flex spot, and it could be a number of different cards. It could become a 3rd Gaia Force. It could be, swapped in for an extra copy of the Secret Metal Greymon if I want to maybe take a 1 Groundramon for now. I could even make it a 4th copy of Blitz, even if I wanted to, or even a 4th blocker. There's so many kind of different cards that this could be, but I wanted this to be Tai simply because I don't want to be choked, and I want to have 1 Memory Tamer to go against a format that are covered in Memory Tamers. So by having a Memory Tamer of my own, I don't have to worry about kind of playing the game with the opponent where they get 3 return, but I only get 1. Now we each get 3. We're both on even ground. And if I happen to build up a full stack, which is generally going to happen pretty often, I get to get that extra security attack +1 when I need it. So yeah, that is my take on my first draft of Omnimon Red for 1.5. So this is going to be the Red episode 2 of the Rainbow series. If you like what you see here, please make sure to like the video. If you like what we do here at Overground, feel free to subscribe and help us reach our goal to hit 400 subscribers for the end of March. I have been Mike, aka Sinaku, and we'll see you guys in the next one.